Welcome, everybody, to the June meeting of the Philipstown Conservation Board. First order of business is the minutes from the May meeting. I believe Rob had sent in some comments. I had sent in some minor comments. Is there anybody else that has any comments? Otherwise, I'd like to have a motion made to accept the minutes. Okay, second. All in favor? Aye. Okay. Is there somebody here from representing Anderson and Mahone? Okay, I guess not. Let's move to Riverview Industries. Glenn, are you handling Riverview?
My office is, but I don't know anything about it.
Okay, so,
I can give you a brief update on that.
okay.
I guess Margaret had reached out to us in regards to the final approvals from the Conservation Board for that project. I think they've finally put together the outstanding items that we had requested before the Conservation Board could issue their permit, or our permit, after the special permit was granted by the Planning Board.
Right.
From what I understand, those items were met, and that I think, honestly, at this point, we would vote to issue a wetlands permit for the project, based on what I've seen in the resubmission. So.
Well, that's great. I
Yeah.
don't have anything I can add.
Okay. So would you want to wait until next month to vote and have a presentation made?
I think it probably makes sense because I think there's probably half the board is unfamiliar with the project.
Okay.
Well, I can tell you what the project is, I can't tell you what the changes were.
The microphone? Go ahead.
So I've been missing this microphone for probably 30 years. Before that, they didn't have one. The project is as you probably all know, and I don't know which of you are familiar with it, but the project is on the river side of Route 9. It's probably 3/4 of a mile up from Route 301. It was a wet area that was used for a construction yard when they did some work up when they were hauling materials from up north down into the south, and they were parking vehicles there probably in the 50s, and it was continually used and as a parking facility at some point there was lawn maintenance people in there. There were all kinds of commercial and construction kind of vehicles in there over the years. Eventually, Mr. Reichert, who owns Riverview Industries, that's the truck repair facility on the east side of Route 9, just a little bit north of that. He bought the property and he started putting his vehicles both waiting for service and sometimes after service, and some parts, et cetera, that were on the property. It's adjacent to a wetlands. It was growing, and as it grew to the point where he was violated, and I'll happily hand this off to Margaret, but I'll tell you the rest of my story. So we did a site plan. We came here, we went through the site plan, we did a lot of we put a perimeter wall around the property, we identified the wetlands, we identified mitigation measures, and we at the same time went to the planning board for site plan approval, went through the public hearing stages, and made an application to the state DOT for a controlled entry with curbs in front of the property, so there wouldn't be this pull-off situation where people would be parking sometimes even in the right-of-way of the road along the edge of Route 9. So it was all sort of, the idea was to contain the use that had been established there for so long, make sure it didn't expand further into the wetlands, and during that review process, there have been changes made that I know nothing about, but fortunately Margaret walked in and I will let her tell you what she did.
I thought I was last. So, in actuality, I read over the minutes from the last meeting that we were here, and the plan was basically approved by this board with the contingency that we provide a maintenance agreement. I think it's broken. So I was in touch with the attorney for a long time, and I don't know, there was just a lot of miscommunication, and a maintenance agreement took a really long time, and finally I just modified the one that you had previously approved for Chloe Swanson. So that was what I provided to the town. And with that, we put the manual for the snout, which is the oil separator that's in the catch basin. And the board had asked that we provide that maintenance agreement, and that was the only thing that was outstanding in order for you to approve the wetland permit.
I think it was that, and then also just calling attention to the restoration components of the plan in terms of the invasive species control and the native plantings.
So those notes were added to the plan.
Yeah. So Andy and I spoke about it briefly, I think, and what I was updating the board on before you got here was that essentially the board would be in a position to vote on a permit tonight because you've met those conditions. I think the only item that Andy and I spoke about is ensuring that the permit remain open for an extended period of time. I think typically up to 5 years to ensure that the restoration component of the project gets completed.
Okay.
That was really it, other than, in terms of my comments at this point.
How does, I think the three of you at one point or another were involved with this and had been at the site. Because I think the last site visit was early on in COVID. Tony and Madeline, you're new to the board, so no, you haven't been involved with this. But the question is, using Mac's guidance, and I agree with him as well, knowing the site, are we comfortable voting on this?
Yeah, I am. I know the site.
Okay.
My property's right next door. I buy it all the time. I park trucks there.
So with that, do I have a motion to grant a wetlands permit? Or actually, let me back up for a moment. Does anybody have any comments or questions?
You know how that started? Joe Perk
I didn't know he was
and
on
Vic
that side of the
Torshit.
road.
Joe Perk and Vic Torshit. That was the beginning of the end right there. So we're left with it, and we have to deal with it. End of story.
Okay, so do I have a motion to?
Yeah, I make that motion.
Okay, second?
Second.
All in favor? Aye.
Thank you.
Thank you. Right, so he's, in other words,
Yes.
let's knock that. Right? Okay, let's do another, what I'd like to think is easy, is Anderson and Mahone. This is a property that we looked at on Fox Hollow, it was repair of a bridge. Hi. Hi. And what we had asked for last time, the two things we had asked for was some way to block the bridge from vehicle traffic, which you have done, as well as we wanted a plan of any work that's being done under it, what would catch the materials, which was also presented.
Oh, okay. Do you want me to address either of those?
I think it's pretty has everybody looked at the plans? I mean, I think it's pretty self-explanatory.
Yeah, can I just address the blocking of any traffic?
Sure.
So there's already a gate that's there. It was an old deer fence gate, and it has a couple of uprights and a couple of doors that we just use for decorative purposes. We plant things against them. And because those uprights are already in place, we can just string a chain across. And then the second thing that I think seems to be a good idea would just be to put up a sign. Because I can go to signs.com and say, no vehicles past this point. So that's what we're hoping that we'll do. And, you know, you can approve that as a condition of the permit, which would seem to make sense.
Are you opposed, you're opposed to what your engineer had suggested? That,
You mean the bollard?
yeah.
The engineer didn't suggest that.
Oh, is your- okay.
And I actually am opposed to that, and I can explain to you exactly why. You know, we've been cleaning up this property for about 10 years, and so we go out to the outer reaches of it. And there are places where fencing has been put up and taken down. I think it was fencing. It could have been, who knows, it could have been a clothesline. But what ends up happening is that on stray places of the property, you end up with a concrete footing with a pipe coming out of it that I'm going to have to go and haul and dispose of at some point in time. I haven't gotten to that chore yet. But I kind of don't want to be disturbing the earth close to the stream, which you'd have to do in order to put in the footing. And I don't want to put in another footing when we already have posts that we could use. So that's kind of what the thinking was as I looked at the situation and realized, oh, well, wait a second, we have things that we can use, we might as well be doing that.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's reasonable. Have any comments both on the plan to protect what's underneath the bridge and the stopping of traffic?
I think the chain would accomplish that. I don't see any problem with that, so.
I mean, it's, yeah, I mean, it's basically, we need you to adhere to it, though, because I don't think you want the bridge damaged again either.
No, this is a nuisance.
Okay, so with that, do I have a motion?
What was the resolution for putting a netting down or something underneath? I didn't hear that part of it.
If I can address that too. So what happened is that we asked the contractor for what they would do, because they do this kind of work on behalf of the state all the time. And he said, well, this is what we do for the state. And he did up a schedule for that. And then the engineer looked at that and put his seal on it as part of the plans without any exceptions to it. And so basically, the proposals that are being made are the same standards that the state follows when it does the same kind of work.
So there is a sheet that was enclosed in your packet.
Oh, I missed that, okay.
Yeah, so,
Yeah, I have another copy if anybody wants one.
It's a, Rob, they're basically limiting work to August and September, when the low flow periods would happen, plywood under the bridge while they're chipping it to catch anything.
Okay.
Limit repair activities just to the plywood area. Turbidity curtains downstream if needed or necessary. And tarping an area to put overburden on.
Okay, yeah, that sounds good.
yeah, I mean, it's relatively simple and primitive, but there's not a lot of space.
Yeah, no.
Yeah.
But I do think the I can't speak today, turbidity curtains should be in the permit. So with that said, I mean, I think the one contingency would be the turbidity curtains. Do I have motion
So moved.
and a second? Okay,
So good.
all in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Okay,
Okay, so should I follow up with the office then in terms of getting the paperwork?
I'll send it to you within a week or two.
Okay, yep, great. Thank you very much.
Yeah.
thank you. So we're on to John and Eileen, am I pronouncing it right? Schieneman?
Good evening. So this project is essentially an extension of the work that we've been doing at 711 LaShinju, and it's just basically invasive species management. When we did a lot of the barberry clearing and a lot of the invasive management we've been doing a couple years at LaShinju, it became like a pretty clear line of areas being restored and not restored, and so the owner of LaShinju decided that it would be good to have a little bit more influence outside of her property, and the Schienemans were kind enough to let us do the work, or propose to do the work there. A lot of the area is on a slope, and so the propagule from those plants come down into the area of LaShinju, so there's an impact there, which is part of I don't know, the driving factor behind it. The proposal is basically exactly the same as what we have a permit to do already on LaShinju, and that's invasive species management, and kind of like a gradation of types of control that we use. Excuse me. There's the Foundry Brook has kind of a braided channel with not much soil, so that area we limit to propane torching of shrubs and hand pulling. And then as you go up, we start to get more soil and we start to incorporate the use of herbicides and cutting as well. Pretty simple.
Yeah, I mean, I, like you said, I would consider this an extension of what we've already permitted. I've been out there multiple times. We've been out, other board members have been out there multiple times, and we've seen that distinction you're talking about between the treated and untreated areas between the properties. So, I mean, I guess my advice to the board is if this was all one big parcel, we probably would have just permitted the entire thing anyway, and Tom's crew would have been working on the whole area. Same methodologies, everything is essentially what they've been doing for a few years now. And they work with extreme care and consideration for native flora and fauna while they're doing the work, which is, I would say what their company prides themselves on. And they've been extremely compliant with submitting annual reports and renewing permits, so on an annual basis. So that's been, a great relationship to have established here with the town. So I guess that's my 2 cents on the application, other than what we've read in the materials.
Do I have any questions, comments?
So this has been before the board before?
No, there is a proper, I guess, am I saying it right, Sinju? I think the whole parcel is about 50 acres and about 30 acres.
About 25.
Right, 25 that they've been working on. And it's, I guess the term integrated pest management is not usually used for invasive species management, but in very much, because I've been out there, and actually was out with Tom a couple of years ago looking at what he was doing, but it was very much that. Sometimes chemical, sometimes fire, sometimes manual removal, and so on. I mean, it's a holistic approach to a very big job.
Okay, so part of it has been, parts of it.
So I'm gathering what's,
Yeah, on the property.
what
next door
Sinju has
has
been done, is in the process of being done. I mean, it's a multi-year project, including fencing, and I guess their feeling is they also don't want to be looking at invasives on the next property over.
Yeah, it's part
Right.
of that, but it's also like it's hard to tell from just this singular map. But if you can see, like this land here and down here is owned by LaShinju. There is that property, and this is a slope coming down. So this is directly connected, and so the seeds and whatnot that come from these invasive plants have a direct impact on that property. So we're kind of forestalling some of the impacts of things we couldn't control previously.
Because I was looking at the application and all the questions aren't answered.
Oh, sure, okay.
It seems incomplete to me. There's
Okay,
many questions that
maybe,
maybe they're not important, but to do an
Well,
no or an NA or something.
okay.
If everybody seems to know it and, I'm stepping in a little, it might have been something that you seem familiar with.
You should ask the questions for sure.
Yeah, bring the questions up.
Would you like to see my copy?
I would, yeah, because I don't like to leave things unanswered. Oh, yeah, you got me there. Well, we can go, yeah, you're right.
No, may I have your name, please?
My name is Tom Lewis.
Hi, Tony.
Okay, so we can go through the questions if you'd like to. I'm astounded that I let that slip, but do you want to do that now or?
And the other alternative is, if everybody is comfortable with the work, is just one of the conditions of the permit is to require that the missing questions are filled out, right? And that if something doesn't look right, I think that Max could basically say, okay, there's a problem here.
Sure.
But I think,
Was there something in particular, Madeline, that you wanted to have just covered, or?
No, I mean, listening to your glowing report is again, good enough, but it was just when I was reading the material, I noticed that it was incomplete.
She's
and it
being
just-
thorough.
Sure. Yeah,
It didn't make sense to me that,
it wouldn't make sense to me either. And so,
we ask
yeah.
everyone to answer all these questions and you
I haven't, yeah.
So if it's the condition and you all want to, don't let that stop you, but just that that's part of the condition. I mean, even just the acres of the site isn't filled in, just some, I don't think I'm being a stickler.
No, you're not.
Okay.
thoughts?
Is there anything of substance that we think we're missing that could be controversial?
I mean, honestly, the seeker form, the short EAF, is not something that I always turn to for the majority of the details. I think a lot of that's supplemented in the management plan that he provided, for the most part. So I didn't see anything that stood out to me. I'm totally open to having that in a more complete form. I think that would be a good standard to set. But a lot of those questions I feel like are answered in the actual property-specific management plan. But
Yes.
it could just be a plug-and-play kind of a thing.
But I do think the form, we should have it on record as being completely filled
Yeah,
out.
I think Madeline brings up a really good
Yeah.
point. We need to have consistency with our paperwork for each application.
So the question becomes sort of an unusual condition, but the condition of the permit would be to, before it's issued, fill out the rest of the short form.
Yes, before the
Right.
permit is issued and work can start.
Yep. So if we're all comfortable with that condition,
And upon Max's review
yes.
of said form.
Right.
Yeah.
Are you comfortable with that, Madeline? Okay. All right.
Okay, so in that case, do I have a motion to approve a permit?
So moved.
Second? I'll second. Okay. All in favor? Thank you.
Apologies, thanks for catching that.
Well, I guess you took the words out of my mouth. This is Timber Ridge Properties. So they have two.
Good evening. Michael Dobler, here representing Timber Ridge Properties, the application at 346 Indian Brook Road. And if you note, there's two applications before the board. One wetlands permit for an existing residence that's being renovated. And then there's also an application for an accessory building to be constructed at the rear of the property. So,
Yeah, I think typically when we first hear an application, we like to have the applicant go through, or the representative go through the entire project. In your case, 2 projects or 2 permits, and then we'll probably discuss setting a site visit.
so we have So, I'm not sure if the board has been to the site yet, or did you not? Okay. So the property is located along Indian Brook Road, right at the intersection with Route 9.
Excuse me, sir. Can you just take the mic off there and just hold it, please?
To hold it?
Or bring it
Yes,
closer,
Sure. So, the property has an existing residence on it, an existing driveway, and all facilities. It's currently under renovation, and the house happens to fall within the wetland setback. The wetlands were delineated earlier in the year by Steve Marino, Tim Miller Associates, he flagged a wetland down near the main structure, the existing house, and then he also located a wetlands in the back portion of the property. So the applicant is currently undertaking a renovation of the existing old structure, and as part of that renovation, they're interested in upgrading some of the utility information, including the sanitary sewage system and some of the outdoor patio area, as well as an addition to the existing structure. They are utilizing an existing gravel driveway that will not be disturbed, and they are basically working within the context and the location of the existing house. But as I pointed out, there is a wetlands buffer that goes around the property, so a portion of the addition sits within a wetlands buffer. And that information is provided in the project report. There is proposed to be 3,280 square feet of wetlands buffer disturbance as part of the activities around the existing property, the existing house. And on the back side of the property, of the map, I have the accessory building shown. And it's shown on a separate map because there are two applications made, because the applicants were interested in keeping the applications independent so that they could close out one without being tied to closing out the other one in terms of a timing issue. So I could turn the map over and show you guys the accessory.
In the existing structure, is there any footprint changes?
Yes, that's reflected on the map. You're expanding a portion of the foundation. The existing house we were just currently discussing. And then if you see here at the back, there's an accessory building proposed. Accessory building now is accessed off of Pine Ridge. Pine Ridge is owned by the applicants, and it is a right-of-way that leads back to Indian Brook Road. Part of this application, they're proposing a two-bedroom accessory structure that will have its own sewage disposal system, its own drilled well, and its own stormwater management. This application proposes a new gravel driveway which crosses a flagged delineated wetlands. The wetlands is considered to be minor in nature. The board will have a chance to review that during the site inspection. And the limit of the crossing has to do with just to get the driveway in. It's proposed that there is 11,304 square feet of activity within the wetlands buffer. That has to do with the fact that you also have a wetlands flagged on this side, so between the two of them, it captures a good portion of the proposed gravel driveway. There is also 346 square feet of wetlands disturbance proposed as part of the driveway crossing the flagged wetlands. And there's a culvert pipe proposed for underneath the driveway.
So can you also describe how much you're intending to fill, not just disturb in the buffer?
How much we're proposing to fill?
Of wetland removed, it looks like, that you're going to be filling over for the driveway?
So basically, we are, if you look at the profile, there is a portion of regrading. At the pipe, we're at grade, pretty much, because we're coming down to the low point. Because this is simply a natural drainage area. It's, when you go to the site, you'll see it's not like a functioning wetland, but it's simply the topography collects the drainage, so you can see there are, I guess, signs below grade of a wetlands. But we're coming down to that point so that the driveway is able to discharge off of that. It is a gravel driveway, and then we're climbing back up. There is some fill up as we get towards the house. It could maybe be 3 to 4 foot section, but I believe I would have to do a calculation in terms of giving you a quantity. I haven't done that, but I could provide that information to the board.
Yeah, that would be helpful.
Yep.
So I have a question. What is the purpose of the accessory dwelling? And the reason I ask that is normally an accessory dwelling, let's say it's a guest house, for instance, it's usually accessed by the main entrance to the property, and this is a totally different access point.
Did you ask the rationale for the well?
No, I'm asking.
Oh, for the accessory
So in other words,
building.
what I'm saying is, normally, I'm asking, it's a twofold question. One is, we have an accessory dwelling. Often an accessory dwelling, it's like a guest house, right? Nothing wrong with that. But normally, it's accessed from the main entrance to the property, which would be the existing driveway. Here, you're going for another area of egress, and while the property is certainly not flat, you know, to me, it sort of begs the question, why wouldn't you just extend a driveway from the other point to go up there?
It's almost like a subdivision.
Yeah, I mean, that's,
Yeah, well, there's a couple points here. One being that you can see the grade here, and if you go out to the field, you'll see that there's about a 40-foot hillside climbing up there. So they're trying to protect the integrity of the main house rather than having to carve a driveway through here, through the wetlands buffer and come around, because you would kind of have to traverse the hill. You couldn't go straight up because of the steepness. So it would create some, we had looked at a possibility, but it seemed like it was kind of now turning the backyard into a driveway, whereas the property owns a right-of-way. And that right-of-way is part of the property, and it is continuous out to Indian Brook Road. So the applicant felt that it would make more sense to come in here on just a 1% grade, basically following the contour. And although there is a flagged wetlands, I believe that the board, when they make their inspection, will see that it is not actually a functioning wetland. Once you cross that environmentally sensitive area, you basically are coming up a little slope here to a nice landing. It made a lot of sense to the owners of the property to have it like that.
You said that you don't think that it's a functioning wetland. Is that something that Mr. Marino shared with you?
Correct. He said that it was an insignificant wetland, and the board will be able to see that information when they make the inspection.
What was that based on? What was his assessment based on?
Because there's no water there. It's never flowing. It just happens to, because of the watershed above it, there must be times when there's a heavy storm where the water could collect in that channel and come down. So you really won't see visible signs of a wetlands, but you could identify the nature of the land and the topography that could kind of construe that there's some drainage coming down there at times.
You may want to get more information from Steve on why he came to that rationale to be presented to the board.
I mean, I think that we need to do a site visit. I think that a lot of things need to be staked out. For the extension on the existing home, that where the footprint is changing should be flagged. If there's any change in the septic or the routing thereof, and I believe there is, that needs to be flagged before we go for a site visit. In terms of the accessory building, the entire thing needs to be flagged. Septic field, well, that's a simple single flag, the footprint, the driveway. And then, because I think this might be a referral to planning board or the zoning board of appeals, because it's not what I'm used to as a standard accessory building. You know, are they planning to rent this? So, you know, it's just unusual. Yeah, I mean, it's just unusual to have an accessory building that's not, and it doesn't mean you can't do it or the thought process is wrong. It's just, for us, it's just sort of unusual to have a separate driveway that's not contiguous to anything on the property. And I understand the reasoning why, but I think we need to know that as well, because I don't want to be in a position where we're improving something which really should go before the town attorney to decide whose purview that is.
Right, it's a little bit more than just an accessory building, right? Because it's got 2 bedrooms, it's a kind of
Yeah.
standalone house, really. It's
That's-
a separate residence, which may be fine, but it's kind of not part of what we make judgment on.
It's permitted by code.
We're not arguing that whatsoever. It's just that if you're dealing with wetlands, that'll be our, excuse me, that'll be our purview. Slight inclusions onto steep slopes, the same thing. But otherwise, there might be enough disturbance in all of this that it hits the threshold of that it has to go to the planning board. And I don't want to be in a position that this board is deciding, should this be 2 permits or should it be a single? We're not talking about wetlands permits now. We're talking about whether there is enough land disturbance that it needs to go to the planning board, and I think the planning board would then decide, is this a single permit or is it a dual permit? And I have a feeling it might be a single permit.
It's a single piece of property though, right?
Yeah.
And the threshold for that?
What is the threshold?
Well, I was just thinking, now that you brought that up too, we have, stormwater regulations too in the town, right? So that's an acre of land disturbance triggers a full-on stormwater pollution prevention plan. So that's something that needs to be considered too, and that needs to be the whole property looked at holistically. It can't be broken apart into 2 separate components of a project. But there's a few different triggers that would bring something to the planning board. I mean, the size of the buildings, the size of the square footage of improvement. I don't want to misspeak and give you bad advice now, so I'd like to go back and, I mean, have you had discussions with our building inspector?
There have been discussions
Yeah.
with the building inspector, and the concept has been brought up, and that was acceptable in terms of the zone.
The zoning?
Yeah.
Okay. So we can,
Whether or not these other thresholds, we
Yeah.
haven't
okay,
answered those questions yet.
okay. Yeah, so that would be something that should be looked into.
So as an engineer, the easier calculation for you is total area of disturbance on, we're going to call it right now, Project A and Project B. And then I think at that point, it'll be a discussion with the building inspector, town engineer, and town attorney, whether there's any referral required or not. We're not saying that you can't do this or we're against it. It's just we're concerned about whose purview this is
When you
as the
spoke,
lead agency.
yeah, when you spoke to Greg, did he, indicate that there would be any, did he look at these as 2 separate applications, or did he understand this was one parcel?
It was more or less a discussion of the concept of utilizing the back portion with an accessory building, and it met the zoning requirements.
Okay. Yeah, it may be worthwhile, like we just stated, to reach back out to him again with these more detailed plans and have him take a look at it, and he'll be able to, essentially refer you to the appropriate board outside of us.
Okay, so that's the route we should take, is have the building inspector provide a letter.
Well, we have something in town called a pre-application meeting, which you can ask for him to request, and that will allow you to be heard by the town engineer. He'll review the plans with members of the planning board if necessary. And they may write a letter saying that there are no concerns, but they will be able to identify what other steps you need to take as well.
Okay, so regardless of the threshold of disturbance, it's still recommended that we go to the building inspector and request to have the pre-application meeting?
Mm-hmm.
So it's not just the building inspector that would make the decision?
No, he'll ensure that the town engineer is there if needed to help him make that determination.
Okay, and then the board will schedule a site inspection?
Site visit, yeah,
So
preliminary.
it'll be your firm and the applicants to decide whether they want to stake, because things are going to need to be staked out for us to look at. Do you want to do that, right away, or do you want to have a pre-planning meeting first? That's your decision. I mean, it could be done concurrently if you want.
Okay, so we'll consult. I mean, I would like to move forward with the board's visit, because I think that'll tell the board a lot in terms of the activities proposed. And then in the meantime, it's our job to reach out to the building inspector and to look in on that angle too.
Okay. So then you'll need to let Cheryl know how quickly both properties or both projects could be staked, and then we'll schedule a site visit.
Okay, good, we'll reach out to Cheryl.
Yeah.
And then what we'll do is, you would expect to hear back from us as to scheduling the next meeting, and that may not come until after we have at least discussions with the rest of the town consultants.
But
Very good.
this type of project, the site visit, I would suggest either yourself or another engineer from your firm is there, rather than just have us look. Certain things are easy enough for us to just look staked.
Also, we take your site visit, sure.
Yes,
Certainly.
yes, that's what I would suggest.
Good,
Okay.
okay.
And any additional notes that Steve could provide to you on how he determined his overall, I guess, determination of the wetland classification, that'd be really helpful.
Yeah,
At least for you to have.
provide a report.
Yeah.
Good. Okay, so appreciate your time, and we look forward to meeting you out on the site and also hopefully moving forward with the other consultants.
Great.
Okay, good evening.
Thank you for coming in. Okay. Last but not least, Boscobel.
Good evening. Thank you so much for welcoming us back. I'm Jennifer Carlquist, the Executive Director of Boscobel House and Gardens. And as you know, we applied for a permit to convert an area of Boscobel's grounds from green lawn and undesirable vegetation into a meadow that prioritizes pre-colonial plants. It will be an exciting teaching opportunity and stewardship model for Boscobel, and I think for the community. That application was in February for a March meeting that was canceled for weather. We were invited for the April meeting. Thanks so much. At that time, we scheduled a site visit, which was also April. At that time, you encouraged us to bring our applicator, the actual person who would be applying the proposed herbicides, to the following meeting in May. We did that, and at that time, some specific questions were raised, and you asked us to provide you with a very detailed plantings plan, which we have, a detailed maintenance plan, which we have, and a detailed treatment plan, including specific mapping on the very particular site conditions at Boscobel. So you've got those documents outlaying specific zones of the areas to be treated and the recommendations made to treat those. This project is designed by Larry Weiner and Associates, the foremost meadow designer really in the country. And I have with me Chris Charpin, who's our installation manager, who you met in April and May, and Leah Emery, our director of facilities and operations and finance, and Glenn Watson, who we needed to help with the mapping. So that's our team here tonight.
Okay, is there some Glenn or the associate from Larry Weiner?
So if the board has had a chance to look through the documents we put together describing the species broken down into explicit zones within and outside of the wetland setback. And yes, absolutely, I'm sorry about that. And the proposed treatment for those species on a species by species level with specified concentrations and percents per herbicide. I'm happy to answer any questions regarding that information.
Could you go through the different areas within the buffer that you laid out? We got the materials pretty late, and then our our Conservation Board Secretary was nice enough to print them out for you guys, so.
Okay. So sorry, you mean just within the setback or within the 100-foot setback for the wetland permit?
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. You can just call them out.
So I'll just kind of break it down. We did quite a granular analysis here, but I'll break it down into lawn, we're calling them the lawn zones, and then we have kind of within those certain clusters of what is essentially fescue, and then what is also classic kind of lawn undesirables like clover and plantain. And so those are broken down and by species and percent coverage, and then we have the area around the pond called the pond edge, and we have broken down those specific species that we've identified around the pond edge. We've generated a 2-foot buffer off of the pond edge that will not be sprayed. We're proposing to put a compost filter sock along that buffer line prior to any application, and that will remain for the remainder of the installation. And then the other zones are what we're calling the hedgerow, which is that slope up to Route 9 back behind the pond there. So those are kind of the 3 main sections. Within that, we've broken down at quite a granular level the species, their concentration, and our plan to eradicate them before installing the meadow.
And then you have a second part of the packet, which is the photo analysis by zone.
Yes.
Just to see it visually rather than have to read the
Thank you, Leah.
15 lines of type by each, yes.
Yeah, which on these, I gotta say, 8 by 11,
Need
it's
your
not as quite as
glasses, right?
impressive as, yeah.
Yeah. Pictures are almost easier.
So essentially, what we found is a large majority, kind of what we have described during this whole process is a large majority of the vegetation within the project area is what we consider to be undesirable, meaning typically non-native, typically what's considered weeds, apart from a lot of the trees up on the hedgerow there, which are to be kept and are outside of the application. However, a majority of the vegetation within the project area, which is all described here, is proposed to be treated with various different levels of herbicide. We're proposing within the setback, I know there were concerns about tank mixing of the triclopyr and glyphosate. So within the setback zone, all areas, the only herbicide that will be broadcasted is glyphosate, and the triclopyr will be spot spray only.
And when you're broadcast applying, are you gonna be on like a UTV or a quad with a boom sprayer, or how?
Yeah, so on the upland turf areas, yes, we'll use a ATV with a sprayer and a drift limiter and dye, which is all the specs are all in the part of this packet you have there too. And then on the pond edge and up on the hedgerow will all be tank sprayed from the backpack.
Can you share with us again what the timeline is for this project?
Yes, so our proposed timeline, we ideally, obviously contingent on permit approval, we would, we accepted to push the first application with considerations for nesting birds through till at the end of June. And then followed by a mow to mow down resulting vegetation, and then another spray in, what do we have here? Another spray in September. Just wanted to make sure it'd be late August or September, depending on how we're seeing the weather conditions, these kinds of things. And then the final spray in October before the seeding, which would happen in the late fall, usually early December. Depending on the permit process, that may have to change. And we would possibly have to shift that. However, that is the timeline we are proposing at this time.
What's the purpose of the late October spray? I mean,
Yeah, so we start, right now, it's the warm season, so warm season plants are growing. So our first two applications are dealing with the warm season plants, and then when things start to cool down in the fall, we want to target the cool season things to get a full holistic elimination so that we don't have residual plants coming in before seeding.
just wondering if maybe that'd be better in the spring, like the early spring, because they would still be maybe coming back, because now it's still cool weather, and now you're getting whatever else is coming as well, so it might just be more valuable to do it in the spring.
Yeah, we try to do this in as short of a time window as possible. That being said, if our timeline does get shifted, that is certainly a possibility. Our preferred seeding windows are the dormant season, meaning late fall, early winter, or the heat of summer, which give our native seed mixes the best chance to get established. So if we were to shift the installation timeline, we would propose a cool season spray in the spring, and then likely a summer seeding of the meadow.
So if I can underscore that, it means we're missing our window. So we have a window. This really is the last meeting to make that window for this year.
Other questions, comments, thoughts?
I still have issue with, not issue, but I'm concerned about the amount of area that we're killing off. You know, and I got concerns about, the residual stuff getting down into the stream, getting into the marsh. And, there's some letters there. There was a letter, I'm not sure if you guys got it in the packet, where the Audubon guy sent something up saying that they're not happy with this at all, the Putnam County Audubon. It just seems like a really, really huge area, that you're killing off.
So I can speak to our practices, which we've discussed, allowing no runoff of material, just wetting and things binding up in the plant material and the soil, as well as the installation of the compost filter stock.
There's going to be bare soil there after everything's cooked. And so when we get a big rain, that's going to go down into the stream.
So the roots of what we eliminate actually hold that earth together, especially in the turf areas and on the slope there, because the plants are dead, but the roots are still intact and do hold that soil together, eliminating.
Yeah, but the soil, I kind of don't agree with that from experience, but it's going to run downhill.
And if I can speak, Tony, we so appreciate your concern for the marsh. We are stewards of the marsh as well, and throughout this plan, we've been in very close coordination with the Audubon that controls the marsh and maintains the marsh. And so you have a letter of support from the marsh stewards saying that they've been part of this process along. We've met with their biologists, we've gone over this in detail with them, and they're with us, so.
We had letters from the Putnam County Audubon Society.
The Audubon Club.
They were not too happy with it.
The Audubon Club, you're correct.
There
But
was a lot of neighbors that were not too happy downstream.
Well, we don't have any other downstream neighbors than the marsh. And the Audubon Center and Sanctuary, again, we've been working with them for years on this project, first with Eric Lynn, then with Scott Silver, now with Rebecca Schultz, over several years. So their biologists, those scientists who are charged with caring for the marsh, have been part of this project since the beginning, because we are caretakers of the marsh too, and we take that role extremely seriously.
And the other question I have is the end use of what we're doing there. Now, there's the thing you guys submitted about it being a playscape and putting in structures and all that stuff, and where does that
There's
stand?
nothing about that in your packet today, Tony. So there is discussion at some point about possibly adding a playscape at Boscobel. But what we have applied for is a permit related to the wetland area, and it's for herbicide use.
Yeah, but
So what you're
the
discussing.
end use, usually when we issue permits, We want to know what's going to end up back there when everything's done, and that question really hasn't been answered.
This is a plants project, and you have the planting list in front of you. So as Boscobel's site plan develops, we've actually just had last week a pre-meeting with the planning board to discuss things like facility changes, but this meeting is really focusing on the plants project and the wetlands area. So we're thrilled to talk about that. We don't have any other firm plans for structures of any kind or anything like that for the area. This is a plants project.
Oh, I'm sorry. I was going to say, I think it's important to remember that we have a very specific purview, and that's the wetlands buffer area. We're not responsible for vetting the entire master plan for Boscobel. So I think we need to focus on that area and what may or may not be happening in that area.
I was confused about this too, because you included information about the playscape, and I didn't
We actually resubmitted, and that's not included anymore. That hasn't been included for a few meetings, so I'm not sure.
Well, I don't know, when you submit something, you'd have to specifically tell us that you want to omit. I don't know.
I did.
Okay, so going back to what MJ said.
But I think, just let me finish my point, it was just, there was no distinction made whether or not that was in the buffer or not, so I think that's it. Okay.
The only thing we're talking about is that buffer area, which it's a plants project. And so, if you want to talk about something else offline, happy to. But really, this is just about the plants.
No, I just want to make sure that we're all on the same page.
So, to reiterate what MJ said, the purview is that we basically are focusing on the 100-foot buffer to the pond wetland complex. Unless the board or any member of the board feels that anything beyond that would cause grievous harm, such as runoff into the buffer area or the pond, then we would not regulate that whatsoever. The other thing that I'd like to tell everybody is that whether we like the use of herbicides or not, that's not really our purview. Our purview is to make sure that if they are being used, that they're being used properly. I mean, that's very important. I know, if I wanted to establish a meadow on my property, I'd probably use fire first before I went to herbicides, but I know that some herbicides would need to be used.
Different permit.
So that, I'd like to spur, a little bit more discussion. I mean, I'm not an expert, but I am I went through the process of becoming an applicator like Max is. Everything that I've seen in here and our discussion with Mr. O'Neill, I believe his name is, I might not say like how it's being done, but I think the proposal is competent and it would be considered, he's using several best practices, and I think we have to weigh it on that, rather than our personal feelings, I don't like the use of herbicide. I'd like to see a more holistic approach because, I went to the little lecture that Mr. Wiener gave at Boscobel, and I understand his methodology. He's going to get you a meadow quicker than other ways would. I don't necessarily love the terminology restoration because I don't look at it as being a restoration. I'm more comfortable with the establishment of a meadow utilizing regional native plants. So those are some of my thoughts. I'd also like a little bit more information. I believe there's a 2-foot gap between the edge of the pond and stream that are not going to be treated.
That's correct.
So what is the plan there?
In terms of weed control management, will be manual cutting.
Okay.
I have a couple questions. So since we mentioned runoff from the road, have you looked to see if there's any, hidden pipes there that are runoff that come down into that stream? I'm just wondering if there's anything there that's, legacy, that's old, that maybe would cause some extra washing down, no?
Thank you. We did do a utilities underground survey, and no, there's nothing there. The only feeding is from the Boscobel side. It's on the other side of our entrance drive.
Okay, so that's good. That's the only thing that's uphill that could come outside the buffer after the last question. And I think we talked about it a little bit the last time, but since there is public concern and you are partnering with, your neighbors and the marsh, and they do have some scientific expertise there, could a sampling plan be drawn up that might be also part of the educational process that could be here? So if you sample pre-soil and post-soil, pre-water, post, spraying, and you kind of get a look at what maybe over time has, remained there. I don't know what measurements they would take, and if there's existing, soil tests that could test for some of these, pesticides or herbicides in the soil, but maybe that might be another educational arm to it, and also provide some monitoring and some, some learnings.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Happy to. We did do soil testings to develop this plan, and really, being as open about this process is part of the meadow design. It's part of the education process. So making sure that we can share with the community what was the process of establishing rather than restoring this meadow. Why were these methods chosen versus, goats or fire, et cetera, et cetera. And it's part of the education process. That is what's so exciting about this project.
So you guys would test the soil, then test the water, then test it after the application?
We did indeed do soil testing, and as far as water goes, I don't know that we do that, but.
No, we would. Someone independent of Mr. Weiner's company could do a test, and then after it's done, do another test.
Yeah, we've used Pine and Swallow, so they are independent.
We'd have to look into that. I know these tests can be notoriously hard to determine quantities of specific compounds, but we can certainly look into it and try to find someone who can do that for us.
Yeah, I think there's got to be some type of existing test for some of these pesticides, herbicides in the soil. I'm not so sure about the water because there's obviously a big dilution factor there, but certainly it should be detectable on the soil. And there is data out there, in literature, so somebody's got to test. But maybe also some type of impact assessment, like once you spray, kind of qualitative, just like looking around and kind of documenting in a standard way, like what's happened and what the impact is, and also noticing if there's dead fish or, like something like that, just to provide that other, not that there will be dead fish, but just to provide that, that assurance that we're looking for it and that you got a report.
I so appreciate that. We're actually in conversation already with groups who could come in and do counts of pollinators, counts of birds, and that's part of the project. So thank you for that suggestion.
More counts of chemical. The other stuff is really good too, but just see if it migrates down in there. Then if it does, then somebody would have to be responsible for cleaning that up. I'm not sure how that would work. That goes into a whole DEC thing.
Since the community is so worried about the chemical runoff into the water, can you maybe explain how the filter works, how it's submerged into the water, or how close it is, or how it works? And
Yeah,
maybe
absolutely.
That would...
So the filter stock is not submerged in the water. We are going nowhere near the water, spraying nowhere near the water within 2 feet, nowhere on the water. The sock is essentially a mesh tube filled with a medium that absorbs any moisture that comes down off the slopes into the pond, and so it would just absorb that material and hold it and not allow it to cross into the pond. However, our practices theoretically do not allow for the material to pool and collect and run off into the pond.
Right, and how long, obviously it's going to be there while you're doing the work, but how do you know when the filter is full?
I suppose we could try to test the material does break down. So it has, in these two compounds, you have a relatively short half-life compared to a lot of other herbicides. And it's dependent, but they're weeks to month as opposed to some other herbicides which are within the years. So we could certainly monitor it and try if we're able to identify someone to do soil testing, we could certainly test the material within the compost stock as well. I think that's a great idea.
Other comments, questions, suggestions?
No, I just think the sampling, some type of sampling plan would be useful, testing, just because there is public interest, and you have the opportunity with both the marsh and, you know, your own site for the educational purpose to be able to present that data, so I think that would maybe help the public as well.
Yeah, I think that compiling that in an annual report too would be extremely important component of this. All the metrics that you talked about having volunteers tackle, I think those need to be formalized in how you're assessing success on the project as a whole on a year-to-year basis in that report. Similar to other projects that we've permitted in the past, they'll give us that entire annual breakdown of kind of successes and failures, what would need to change as time goes on to this plan to help meet your management goals.
Could I work with you on that, Max, and we can, develop, can we connect with you and look at that format that you think the board would find helpful and the community would find most helpful? We'd love to do that.
Yeah, I'd be more than willing to do that. I defer to the board members to make that decision in voting on the permit itself. But yeah, I'm open to doing that with you guys. I want to, I guess, speak to the sampling point too. I think that should be based in some sort of actual science. I know it is difficult to come up with thresholds and metrics to actually record a lot of the concentrations that we'd be looking for. So if there is some sort of threshold that has been established for each of those chemicals that we can use or can be used to compare your sample to, that's going to be really important.
Would that be DEC, do you think?
Probably not. You'd probably need to reach out to a university maybe that specializes in actually testing for the herbicides. I think there's
Okay, yeah, that's true. And as you know, we've been working with Cornell Cooperative Extension on Boscobel's entire site management plan, including this project, and so maybe they can help us with these kinds of resources.
Yeah.
That's great.
So I guess I would just start and look at different labs that are like embedded within colleges that specialize in that, and maybe they could offer you a suggestion in terms of like how to measure for those things.
I'm going to check with Clarkson University. They have they have that center at Dennings Point.
Oh, okay.
The
sure,
Beacon
absolutely.
Institute for Rivers and Estuaries. And the director his name is Mike Walsh.
Great. That's great.
I mean, there's definitely papers out there, so there's got to be some types of standards.
Yeah.
It's not my area of expertise, so.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a combination of potential, wildlife metrics too, like looking at certain amphibians that are remaining present in the area. I know American toads, if you have them there, are a really good indicator for changes in water chemistry. I've seen that being used to kind of dictate, a threshold for, from a biological standpoint, overuse of herbicides. But yeah, there definitely are standards. Yeah.
Other thoughts, comments? While this isn't a public hearing, is there anybody that would like to speak, but please keep it brief? Come up to the microphone.
I actually, Karen Ertl, Garrison, I actually like to just show a picture because I don't know what methods is being done already. I think it's probably just short mowing the lawn, but much of the area we're talking about is already brown. It's already almost dirt, and the buffer you're looking at is the buffer you're proposing, just that little 2-foot buffer. So they're already using non-herbicidal strategies to kill the lawn, which is a good thing. I want to commend you for that. And I'd like to encourage them to continue those kind of methods, which seem to be working. The whole stretch is brown. I'm mowing my lawn twice a week, and I know what you must be doing is shortcutting it, which kills lawn. So it's working, and I would recommend we look at things like that. Thank you.
Anybody else? So before I ask for a motion, I'm going to ask whether everybody is comfortable voting on a permit.
Yeah.
I think it should be a conditional permit.
Yes,
In
absolutely.
regards to the monitoring plan.
Yes. So why don't we, before we vote on it, why don't we begin putting together a list?
Okay. So,
I think there should be extensive before and after photo documentation.
Okay.
GPS located.
So like a photo points map?
Yep. Yep.
So a baseline documentation,
Of what it looks like.
binder,
Yep.
yeah.
And then after each, and, but geolocated, so you'd have a map. Yes. What else do we want?
So did you mention that you're gonna have bird surveys being done? Okay, so who would be doing those and on what, or I guess that's a detail that you're trying to figure out?
That's right.
Okay. So,
And in general, an entire wildlife,
yeah.
everything.
So,
Who cares? Everything.
I mean, I would suggest avian and amphibian. Yeah. Okay.
Is anybody maintaining the pond for you?
I mean, our staff, that really, we have, 5 full-time staff members in the maintenance department, but it's, it maintains itself, really.
I mean, the obvious stipulation that when you guys notified DEC that or do you have to notify DEC for the applications at all? Okay, so then if you could notify us prior to your applications, like when your application is gonna be happening, maybe a week beforehand or so. Obviously, it's weather dependent, I think that'd be helpful. I know that's kind of not a reporting metric, but that'd be something that would be beneficial for us, so that if the community does have concerns and they do reach out to us, we kind of know what to expect.
Sure. And you're welcome to visit
Okay.
2Max if you'd like to.
What are thoughts on, within the permit, I know this is unorthodox, is essentially Boscobel, probably the easiest way to do it would be to put a small posting in both newspapers in town explaining what they're doing and why.
I love that idea, and we are bringing back Larry Weiner for a public lecture. So happy to do that.
That would be the most widespread, because I think there are going to be questions. I mean, we already heard it when, which was probably done inappropriately, when there was some herbiciding done on what was the Garrison golf course. And I think this is a viewable area, and I think that should be part of the permit, that, I don't think we're talking about a lot of costs, that it's in both newspapers.
Happy to do that. And we're also going to be posting didactics on the site as well. Because people are going to wonder what's happening. Apart from the drought, they expect Boscobel to be green. So we want to make sure that we're explaining that.
What else would we like?
Well, you obviously mentioned the water and soil chemistry plan.
Yeah, with some type of basis, like as you mentioned,
Okay.
as a reference.
Baseline.
Yeah. Baseline would be included in that.
I mean, it would be ideal to have a baseline limnology report of the pond, but I'm not sure that's happening that quickly.
We have a baseline on the soil already.
But we're talking about water quality in the pond, and there are not many people that do that anymore because of consolidation. So that might be an unrealistic goal.
We'll try.
I mean, I think we can put that as a suggestion.
It would be good, I mean, obviously with the dilution, it's hard to see if, overspray got in there and measure it, but.
But once it's done, it's done.
Right.
Right.
But I know Solitude and to a certain extent Princeton Hydro do work in the area. So maybe they would be available, particularly a Solitude, to give you a baseline, which could be used. Anything else?
You said you did the survey for all the pipes on the road and everything. Like, is there any, I don't know the area particularly well, is there any other place where it might be coming in from? Is there any other hills that come from the other side, or it's just that part of the road that possibly might have drains or something like that?
There aren't drains into it. It's fed through an underground, it's sort of conducted under our drive from the north side of our property. So it kind of collects on that side and then gets.
But it's underground, it's not.
That's right, it's underground. Mm-hmm.
Right. And then the only other spot I saw that was really wet was by that house where you said they go ice skating.
That's where it daylights. And so the pond, just the sloping doesn't quite collect at all, so that's where it daylights.
Right. And is that area getting sprayed?
I think that's where the edge of the meadow is. Yep,
Yeah, 'cause
and that's
the
noted on
only
your map.
risk of then water, like pooling off and coming off. So, I don't know, maybe some sort of barrier or something there?
Okay.
What would you put there, Max, to like, if you did get like a 5-inch storm of rain and water came down like 2 days after they sprayed or something, just to prevent that from washing into this?
In theory, it really shouldn't, the chemical shouldn't move 2 days after.
That's theory.
Yeah.
But there's also the compost stock that's going around, which provides a barrier.
We could extend that up to the
Right.
daylight areas.
Yeah.
Yeah.
As well.
As I said, I don't know it's too well,
Gotta have you over, Bob.
but my kids are all larger now, so we don't go do those things anymore.
I guess I was thinking too, maybe writing in as a suggestion to the board to think about maybe, I guess writing in some sort of condition in regards to maybe in year 3. I mean, this is like, how many years out are we projecting this project?
It's a 3 to 5
3 to
year,
5.
but really maintenance for this, it's forever. It's not a put in and be done, we only have to mow twice. This is an ongoing project, but the herbicide use, you're absolutely right, it's spot after the initial.
Yeah, I guess what my thought would be formalizing in your plan, and maybe we do this as a condition or just a change at year 3, 4, or 5. We start to look at reassessing treatment options and seeing if mechanical removal, seeing if other treatment options are appropriate at this point, because the levels of invasives are at a threshold now that they're more easily tackled, or you've achieved your goal to some extent, and then we can completely, downsize, what essentially you're proposing to do.
We maintain the mentality of all our projects, so that's.
Okay.
That's what we can bring.
And then on the same side of that, it'll be a multi-year plan, so you'll have to keep that permit open for the life of your plan, essentially, if you're going to be doing work in that area. So you'll need to renew your permit on an annual basis, so just be aware of that.
Can't wait.
And the other thing, I do want the applicator to let us know, looking at the labeling of the dye and the surfactant, I don't see anything where it's talking about, can it be used in near a wetland? And I couldn't find anything on the DEC pesticide portal on that.
I don't think the dye has a specific labeling for that. I know we've used Bullseye in wetland applications, that's what we use. So the surfactant, I'm not sure.
Right.
Yeah,
And
but
the
the
surfactant would
dye,
be
yeah.
the more, yeah.
And obviously the dye is, the purpose of it is to make sure that it's not getting into the water, is what the
Right.
dye's for. So,
Well, plus the coverage.
that's right.
Make sure you don't miss spots.
Thank you.
Anything else?
In regard to getting started, this is a conditional permit, or you used a word, I've forgotten it. I'm wondering if there is a list of these conditions that can be prepared, and so they could get started on their first
That's the whole
application
that's the whole
before your
idea.
next meeting?
The whole idea is, I think that put together a conditional permit quickly. I think, Max, you and I can look at it and get it back to you within days, and
And then formalize it next month.
yeah, and if this, Well, I think,
we can formalize
I think you want to, formalize it before next meeting, because you're going to lose your window if we approve. So I think, that, yeah, I think the target should be that within 7 days, you know,
Okay, great.
everything is decided.
Thank you.
So with that, do I have a motion?
So
to make- Second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Against or abstaining? Okay. Okay, Thank you.
all so much. We'll take all of that to heart. Thank you.
thank you. We have any old business or correspondence?
The only update would be on the stormwater action group that we're trying to have meet. Cheryl has been coordinating. We tried to get a doodle poll together to meet potentially this week, but a few key people didn't answer. So I think, Cheryl, you've reached out to some folks, and it looks like June 25th or 26th is a better date for our first meeting. And essentially, I guess, Andy, I don't think you were included on Cheryl's conversation to that group, but I would see if
I can't.
you can't.
I'm
Okay.
traveling, but that's fine.
Okay, so you'll be at the next one.
Yeah, I'm fine, sorry.
So we're gonna set it. We'll set it for that date. This is the stormwater group, just as an update for everyone. And
Trying to tie in the villages as well.
yeah, so it's a little bit difficult. So we're gonna set that date. The core group of people will be Jason, Ron, the town engineer, the highway superintendent, myself, I think Neil Toman, and an environmental. Is he an environmental engineer? It's a new a new planning board member that joined. So he's gonna help us a bit with that end of things. And then we did, John did reach out to Nelsonville and Cold Spring to be involved as well. So we'll see if they can join. But that's the only real other update on that end of things.
What's the goal of the?
It's to formalize this. I mean, this in years past, especially when Mike Leonard was still on the board, we had quarterly meetings to do kind of good housekeeping on our stormwater annual reporting and the things the town needs to be doing to stay in compliance with the MS4 regulations. So that's part of it. The other part is to try to wrap our heads around any sort of other potential opportunities that come before the town that potentially have things to do with like any FEMA issues, natural disaster, like hazard disaster kind of things that don't really have a place to land in the town necessarily. So we'll try to wrap our heads around it maybe and see if they rise to priority to spend some time on it. But yeah, that's it for me.
Anybody else have anything?
I was wondering, Jason, if you had anything for us on the conservation subdivision legislation, or where that was kind of sitting here, kind of floating a little bit.
Yeah, I don't think it was.
And I don't know if I've given this update before, so it would be in the same place, but you know that the town board discussed a moratorium on the conservation subdivision. The town's council advised that a moratorium at a time when we have an active conservation subdivision case wouldn't be the right move. And so the Hudson Highlands Reserve is still in front of the planning board, and so I think the idea now would be to work, and I know the Hudson Highlands Land Trust has said that they could help have a conversation about kind of how to look at that conservation subdivision language and reevaluate it and make sure it's kind of meeting the intent. But so moratorium is off the table for the moment, while there's this active case. And I just don't, there hasn't been a real push to engage Hudson Highlands Land Trust, so that's really where it stands. And I, to be honest, haven't pushed that forward. So I think the board, I guess, needs to be a little bit more active in starting to kind of bring in some folks who can advise us on how we may look at it. Yeah.
Okay.
We talked about bringing in some type of outside consultant for this,
Yeah.
because obviously we don't have, the expertise in writing these type of laws for the town.
Yes.
And that might be also beneficial, rather than having, the land trust, be the sole advisor area. It might be a good way to just show that it was a neutral approach. But have you looked into that at all?
I think the original idea was to have an outside consultant, someone who had expertise in conservation subdivision regulation language that was not Hudson Highlands Land Trust. Yeah. Of course.
Question.
Yes.
What is, if you know,
Yeah.
what is the town's definition of an accessory dwelling?
That is a good question, and I will not have a good answer for you. Yeah. Yeah.
That's in E-code. You can find that in
Oh, yeah, I know how
Yeah.
to find it. I thought, hey, why not?
Yes.
Give it a shot.
No, we could, any other quizzing on regulation, but that is, any other quizzing on regulations will have to happen.
Throw out a chapter. Throw out a chapter page.
Yeah, exactly. Mike Leonard probably would have been really good at answering a chapter page regulation, yes. But I'll look into that, yeah. Yes, of course, Madeline. Anything else? All right, I look forward to that stormwater
Anything else?
meeting. Nice, yeah.
Thank you. With that, then, do I have a motion to adjourn the meeting? Second? All in favor? Thank you. You can cut.